Welcome to the Corner Note. My name is Isaac.
And I'm Elijah. And today we're going to be continuing our gospel series. Yeah.
This is part 3 of 4.
Part 3 of 4. And we're going to be doing the death of Jesus.
Yes. So the crucifixion and some more stuff along those lines. And because we want to talk about this accurate to the Bible, accurate to how we know that
Pretty
Jesus
in-depth.
actually died, there is going to be some graphic, discussions about things surrounding the crucifixion. So if you have a weak stomach, maybe not, listen to this episode or watch it. But
or just skip over a
little bit. But you have been warned. And second disclaimer, we are not theologians, we're not pastors.
We've said in the past too.
We are not professional, Bible, just things like that. We're just people trying to
read
talk
the Bible,
about the gospel,
talk about it exactly.
Talk about it biblically sound way, and just try to bring this information in the most accurate way that we know. So, yeah. Alrighty. So there's just so much here, but
yeah, these are gonna be long. We've said in the past,
this
multiple
will
times.
Definitely be a longer episode. So buckle up, maybe grab a snack. So yeah. So just to give some context before we actually read some scripture. So we're starting at the Passover feast, aka the Last Supper. So Jesus is sitting down with the 12 disciples, and this is like the night, or like
the night he gets turned into
before he gets turned into the Romans. Before the crucifixion and all these things are about to take place. And it's at the supper where he's basically prophesying about the events that are about to take place.
That night.
So here you have Jesus sitting around the table with his 12 disciples, the Last Supper. And they are having the meal, and Jesus is breaking the bread and saying, this is my body, which is going to be broken. Take this in remembrance of me. And he was saying, whoever I pass the bread to first is going to betray me. And he passes the bread to Judas. And, Jesus is prophesying about, Judas is going to be the one to give him up, to turn him in. And then next, he has the wine, and that's to symbolize the blood that is going to be spilled out. And, take this in remembrance of me. And so he's essentially prophesying about the events that are about to take place. The bread is his body, and the wine is his blood. And
a lot of people like to twist that and be like, try to make it literal.
Yeah, and try to make it
not.
Like,
it's
weird.
It's a metaphorical explanation of how when we believe in Jesus, we're taking on what he we're believing what he did for us, and stuff. So,
and that's where we get communion from. That's where we get the drinking of at our church it's like
grape
a little
juice. Some places it's
a little cracker and a little unleavened cracker and grape juice, but it's unleavened bread and wine. But so and then after these events, Jesus goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he begins praying. And this is in Luke 22.
Verse 39. Yeah, I'll read
Verse 39.
that. Verse 39 through 46. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation."
So there's a really interesting thing that we want to talk about here. There is a medical term. It says that his sweat was as great drops of blood.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, medical terminology. I mean, they didn't use the medical terminology, but the medical term for that is hematidrosis, which is a medical condition that causes you to ooze or sweat blood from your skin when you're not cut or injured.
Yeah.
And what's happening is basically the capillary blood vessels that feed the sweat glands are rupturing.
So then the blood is going through your sweat glands, and it's like, I'm imagining, like, in this scene, right? Like, he goes to the disciples after he prays. It doesn't, explain if he, like, wiped himself off or not, but, like, I'm wondering if he did and stuff, because, like, they didn't, like, they were sleeping, so, or it could have just been dark, they couldn't see him, but, like, he comes up to them, and he's got blood dripping all over him, kind of thing, Yeah. That'd be kind of weird.
Kinda
or, like,
creepy,
yeah.
In this, what he's experiencing, hematidrosis, this happens under extreme,
agony
extreme
or anxiety,
physical or emotional stress.
Yeah.
So the anxiety and emotional weight he was under at this time,
because he knows he's about to be crucified, and
he
we'll
knows
get into
what that means.
we'll get into the how Romans crucified back then, and it's just super, like,
Oof.
he knows he's about to die. He's just, I can't imagine that, like I've been stressed out before, but not to that extent.
No.
I've been so upset, quite a few times, and stressed out quite a few times, but it's never been that insane before.
Yeah. And so in between some of these events, so the arrest of Jesus, he's in the garden, he's praying. And at that time, Judas was with the Romans, and he says, "Whoever I kiss, I'm going to, identify who Jesus is with a kiss," basically.
Who they want to arrest.
And so him and the Romans go into the garden, and Judas greets Jesus with a kiss. And so the Romans go to arrest Jesus, and Peter is like furious. He's angry. So he draws a sword and cuts off one of the soldiers' ears.
Yeah.
Crazy. This is Peter, man. He's furious, bro. Like, he does not want Jesus to be arrested.
Yeah.
This is like his leader. This is God in human flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Peter knows who they're dealing with, and the Romans are just following orders.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure some of them don't know.
Yeah.
Who they're dealing with.
It's in either, it doesn't, I don't know, I can't remember if it specifies in either in the garden or during Passover, but when Jesus also prophesies that Peter is going to deny him 3 times, which we've talked in the past on certain episodes about that.
Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting that, even still, Jesus told him that he was going to do it.
Yeah.
And, Peter still did it,
Yeah, and the other interesting thing too is after Peter cut off this soldier's ear,
Mhm.
Jesus pretty much like put it back on. He like
Yeah.
picked up his ear, like just healed him. You know,
Yeah.
it's crazy. That should have been like
That's
a
like a
sign, like
forgiveness almost. Like,
yeah,
like, I'm willing, like, I know you're about to take me into, just lead me into my death, but I'm gonna, like, I'm healing you just because, like, this wasn't how it was supposed to be.
yeah. And Jesus told Peter, like, no,
Yeah.
this is supposed to happen.
Mhm.
Type of thing. Even though probably Jesus didn't want to at the time. It's God's will. It's
Yeah. I
what
mean, he prayed, that your will be done, but
he said.
if you're remove this cup from me, saying like,
Yeah,
remove this, uh, if this, you know, if please don't let me go through this almost.
yeah. He's like, I don't want to go through this,
But
but
if
if it
it's your
is
will,
your
let it
will,
be done.
let it be done.
I think that's actually something, kind of like we should pray a lot of times. Not like remove this cup from me part, but praying like, because we a lot of times God's gonna do things that we don't want.
Oh yeah,
We don't want him to do, but he knows us better than we know ourselves. So we gotta just, pray that his will be done, and that's what we gotta, do because he knows us better, like I just said. So,
yeah. And the other thing too is that we are going to be put through things that we don't want to go through.
hmm
And so I think we should always pray that if this is God's will be done, let it be done.
yeah.
I start praying that every night.
hmm
And yeah, it's just interesting that the whole way that this happens, and after Jesus gets arrested and some more events take place, Pilate, the leader of the Romans at the time, he doesn't want to crucify Jesus.
Yeah.
He sees him as innocent. He doesn't see
hmm
anything wrong, but the people are like, crucify him. He's like,
So he
why?
just, yeah. So he goes through with it because the people
He had the
are,
people vote.
hmm
He said, whatever the people say, I will do. And it's really interesting that they put a criminal, Barabbas, and I think the
free.
Bible also talks about the crimes that he did.
He was a robber,
He was a
it says.
robber.
Yeah.
And they had a choice. They're like, Barabbas or Jesus, an innocent man.
hmm
And Barabbas was like, people didn't like him, but they chose to crucify Jesus over Barabbas.
Yeah.
And there's this really good song um, called I Am Barabbas by Josiah Queen.
Yeah.
Really cool song.
Yeah.
And it talks about how, like, we are like Barabbas. We're a
hmm
criminal. We are
Full of sin,
full of sin.
and Jesus took upon that for us.
The lyrics say he bought the bond with blood.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend listening to that song.
Yeah.
It's really good. Lyrically phenomenal. But
hmm
yeah, so it's super interesting. And I just find this whole scenario is just super interesting, the way that these people just wanted to put to death an innocent man.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that were crucifying him were Jews and Pharisees and people that don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that Jesus
Yeah.
was and is God.
Yeah. I've also heard, people say like we are those people also putting him to
Yeah,
death.
we do that so often.
We're in Barabbas's place and we're also the crowd's place.
Yeah,
We're the people wanting to put wanting to crucify Jesus, but at the same time, Jesus forgives us, and we're placed in Barabbas's place where we're where wanting him to be crucified still, but he's removing, or sorry, but he's taking upon that for us instead. So pretty interesting how we have like a little bit of, everybody in the story.
Yeah, we have a little bit of Pilate in us. We have a little bit of Barabbas in us. We got a little bit of,
the majority,
the
the crowd.
Pharisees and the non-believers in that crowd.
Because of our sin, he was crucified. So that's like the crowd part. But the Barabbas part is because he loves us so much that we didn't have to suffer the death that he did for us. So,
and a couple of things that happen in between this and the crucifixion. So after they choose Jesus, the Romans in Luke 22:63, they're mocking Jesus, and
they put a purple robe on him, and purple, the color back then, meant royalty.
Yeah.
So they're putting but they're mocking him, and I believe in one of the, not I believe, it says in one of the verses, that they were telling him like, kind of like, save yourself. Like if you are God, like Jesus, or you're the person you say you are, save yourself.
Yeah.
But
and Mark 14:65 says that they were striking him, spitting on him, beating him, mocking him, and they even put a crown of thorns on his head, which is, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. And mind you, they're put the crown of thorns on him, and punching him, smacking him across the head, and I'm sure his head like probably hit like a wall or something. Things that happen when you fall down, because you're being beat, and the thorns are being driven into your head further.
Yeah, it's awful. And then that leads us to John 19:1, which talks about the flogging of Jesus. Now, this is where things get pretty graphic. So, John 19:1, this is one of the worst things that you could go through, especially at this time. This is one of the worst punishments that,
even to this day, I would say it's worse than any of the other punishments people suffer nowadays, and it's of all time, I would say, the worst thing anybody could go through.
And so here's some more context on this. So John 19 says, "Then Pilate had Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip." Now, some more information on this whip that they used. The whip was made with long whips protruding the handle. So they had multiple, probably like 3 different,
I think it's like
whips.
5 like
3 to 5 different like leather
straps coming
out. And what was on those leather straps were nails and like fragments of bones.
And metal weights.
The ends with weights and nails, bone. Like, that's brutal.
And sometimes even hooks.
Yeah, sometimes hooks. Man, and the whole purpose of this was to really just, tear them apart. And we don't know how many lashes it was, but
it was under 40.
It says 39.
Because I read that 40 was like, if they did 40, it was committing a sin. I read it on a website, so I don't know like how like reliable, but
I'm not sure.
What I read was, so take this with a grain of salt, but it said that it was like they believed it was a sin to do 40 lashes, so 39 was like the maximum they could do.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting that this punishment, it was, man, it's just so brutal. And what would have happened? This is what happened to Jesus. It would expose the muscle, bone, and sometimes internal organs.
Yeah. Because, like I said, graphic, but
Yeah.
the hooks sometimes would, grab on, and then when they pull back, it tears the flesh and muscle back, and mind you, they're bound by their hands like this.
Yeah.
If you're watching, like above their head, and so they can't do anything. They're bound, and they just have to take this whipping, this
Yeah.
extremely brutal whipping. And it's just, I don't even know, it makes my stomach like
Yeah, it's
tighten
rough.
up almost. It's just,
And the flogging alone sometimes would
Yeah.
have killed people.
Mhm.
Like
yeah,
you have
they said they would pretty much just flog them pretty much to the point of death. Like that's just,
yeah. And so Jesus should have died like here.
yeah, the amount of
You
blood
know,
loss and
the amount
everything.
of blood loss and shock you would have gone in. I forget what it's called, but I know it's like hypo something shock. But
Yeah.
you know what I'm trying to say. But they would go through, this shock that was just awful. I mean,
Mhm.
the amount of pain and blood loss you're suffering, I can't even imagine it.
Yeah.
And continuing in John 19, it says, the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him. And they said, "Hail, King of the Jews," they mocked, as they slapped him across the face. Pilate went outside again and said to the people, "I'm going to bring him out to you now, but understand clearly that I find him not guilty." Pilate did not want to crucify Jesus. He didn't. He saw him as innocent, you know? And he says, uh, then Jesus, sorry, then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said, "Look, here's the man." When they saw him, the leading priests and temple guards began shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" "Take him yourselves and crucify him," Pilate said. "I find him not guilty." He says it again, trying to tell the people,
Yeah.
this man is innocent. I don't understand why you want to crucify him,
Yeah.
Pilate even finds it hard to believe. The Jewish leaders replied, "By our law, he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God."
Yeah.
When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave no answer. "Why don't you talk to me?" Pilate demanded. "Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or crucify you?"
Yeah.
It's crazy. And, the
Actually,
fact that,
yeah. Oh, my bad. The response that Jesus said after that was pretty interesting too.
yeah, I'm gonna keep reading. But, here's the thing too. Pilate is asking Jesus, "Where are you from?" And Jesus, no answer.
Yeah. Because, like, yeah, it seems like Pilate at this point, he's still like, I need to know more about him because I don't understand why these people, want to crucify him because he's innocent. He's an innocent man. So why do these people want to crucify him so much? So it's like, take him away, like talk to him just one on one, just be like, what's like why,
Yeah, I mean, he's pulling him aside from the crowd and going who are you? Like, why are where are you from?
Yeah.
Because these people obviously think you're a bad guy. I don't see the problem with you, so I need some more answers because I can release you from this. I don't want to punish
Mhm.
an innocent man, you know?
Yeah.
Pilate is like trying to say, listen, Jesus, I don't know who you are, but if you tell me I can have this, you released. And so
Mhm.
Jesus says, you would have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Then Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leader shouted, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. When they said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down on the judgment seat on the platform. That is called the stone pavement in Hebrew. And it was about noon on the day of preparation for the Passover. And Pilate said to the people, look, here's your king. Away with him, they yelled. Away with him, crucify him. What, crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the leading priest shouted back. Then Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified. Pilate really didn't want to crucify him.
Yeah.
You can see many times. He said, this is your king, They still said, we have no king but Caesar, the Jewish priests were saying.
Mhm.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's
You really
wild.
dive in. You really see like
These events,
yeah, the events.
Jesus is up there after being flogged,
Yeah, and mind
cool,
you,
calm, and
he's
collected.
naked too. They're
Yeah,
he's being humiliated in front of these
except for
people.
the purple robe that was on him.
No, I believe they tore that off
It said
too.
that the robe was on. At least in John, it says he came out with the purple robe on.
Okay.
So,
I know at some point they tear it off.
yeah.
So, but
Again,
underneath,
the
the
four
robe, he's still
gospels.
naked.
Yeah,
So he's
again,
still being like, exposed and humiliated in front of all these people. So,
yeah. And again, with the gospels, like some people say, like, in one part it says that they took the robe off him, and this one it says that he had the robe on. Now, a lot of people might say, well, that's a contradiction. It doesn't say in John that they didn't take it off him. It just doesn't note that fact.
yeah.
Because for some writers, it's the same way that the two of us
Mhm.
could go to a movie, write a review of the same movie, but both of us leave out different things, but also include similar things.
Yeah.
So these gospels, they both don't retell the same story 4 times, word for word, bar for bar. They're simply different perspectives of the same thing. Different people, different places, different perspectives. So they're not all going to be the same. But the fact is, denial or silence is not a denial. So what they didn't say was they didn't take the robe off of him.
Yeah.
What they did say was that he did have the robe on. And the other one did say that he did have the robe on, but they took
Yeah.
it off him.
Yeah. I believe they took
So,
it off him afterwards. I'm sure.
yeah, so this is, again, not a denial of
Yeah.
this event, but it is a different perspective.
Yeah.
So, just want to make that clear because there's a lot of people who try to look at these little tiny details and say that's a contradiction and disprove the whole gospel message because of that. And here's the important thing. I was going to save this for the next episode, but I'll just say it now. People like to look at these contradictions in quotation marks for those of you who are just listening, um, and try to disprove all of the gospel message
Mhm.
with little tiny things like,
Yeah.
well, in one part it says they took the robe off him. In this gospel, it says they didn't,
Or didn't say
or
that
it
it
didn't
did.
say that, they did that. And then in some, they'll be like, well, it says that at Jesus' birth, he was, they fled and went here, here, and here. But in the other
Yeah.
gospel message, they fled and went there. Listen, that doesn't disprove the gospel message, because what is the gospel message? That Jesus was born, he lived and taught, he died and was resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that all four gospels talk about. So the main message of the gospel remains the same throughout all four gospels. If you can find a contradiction between all four where, oh, okay, this gospel says Jesus was not crucified, or this one says Jesus was not a teacher, then your gospels would be unreliable. However, all
Or he didn't
four,
resurrect.
or he didn't resurrect, all four have the same message: that Jesus was born, that Jesus lived, that Jesus died, and Jesus was resurrected. If all four of those things are the same throughout all four gospels, then you know it's reliable.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is, after these gospels, Acts, Romans, you read through 1st, 2nd, 3rd Peter, if you read the messages that Paul writes to the churches, to Philippi and to all these other churches, Paul, who had a actual encounter with God, also writes multiple times that Jesus was God in human flesh, that Jesus died, was resurrected. It's in the New Testament multiple times, not even just the Gospels. Multiple times. Corinthians talks about it. Romans talks about it. All these other things. So it's not even just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that talk about this. Paul talks about it. Peter talks about it. We have full evidential and eyewitness accounts of these events. There's no reason to doubt that these events took place. And to think that these people, some of them were alive at the time, and some were, all these things were written within 30 years of these events, these are reliable resources.
Yeah.
The most reliable resources. So when someone like Muhammad comes 600, 700 years later saying these events didn't take place, all the eyewitnesses that saw these events are long gone. They can't defend these events. When someone like Muhammad comes along and tries to say that these events didn't take place, what about the writings that were written 30 years within these events? And I don't know about you, but I'm going to trust the ones written closer to the events than some written almost a millennium after. So, again, more evidence on why to believe.
Yeah.
So, that was a little segue, but just something I wanted to make clear.
Yeah.
Another thing, like why we believe these things. And then in Matthew 27, which is a pretty long passage, but it's Matthew 27:32 through, I don't know where it ends, but I wrote 56, but we're just going to end at the spot where it talks about how he was put in a tomb, which we're not going to talk too much about the tomb and how we know Jesus was placed in the tomb in this episode, but we'll save that for the next episode, for the resurrection.
Okay. So Matthew 27.
Starting at 32.
Okay. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and watched over him there. And over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. And then the death of Jesus is 45 through 55.
Let's keep going.
Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "This man is calling Elijah." And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. But the other said, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him kept watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly this was the Son of God." There were also many women there looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee.
I think after it says he was placed in a tomb.
Yeah, that's 57. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb.
So we're gonna dive into the tomb part in the next episode.
Yeah.
But just some interesting facts about that crucifixion. I don't know if you want to read those.
Yeah,
but,
I'll do that.
If you can read my handwriting.
Yeah,
I
I
have bad
can.
handwriting, but
So about the crucifixion, a lot of this, or some of it's in John, but Jesus, after he was flogged, carried his cross, and he at that time he's bleeding out, and he's in shock and experiencing dehydration because they're not giving him any water or anything at all. And then we read about the sign that Pilate put above his head saying, "This is Jesus," or I believe it says, hold on, sorry.
And a lot of people kind of put this as an abbreviation or as initials. INRL, I believe is the abbreviation, and it's Latin for I'm probably gonna butcher this pronunciation, but I believe it's like Jesus of Nazarene, I don't remember the Latin word for Nazarene, but then it's like Rex Ladorum.
Mm.
But
The inscription put on the cross read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of Jews." King
and
of the Jews.
it was written in 3 different languages too.
Aramaic, Latin, and Greek.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
And it was Pilate who put that on the cross, and I think some people have this misconception that it was also to mock him. But as we read earlier, Pilate didn't want to crucify Jesus.
Mm.
He saw him as innocent, and I think he even began to believe that who he said he was.
Yeah. Because they told him not to write that above him. They wanted him to write, he said this instead of making it a statement that he is this. They wanted the sign to say, Jesus said he is this.
Yeah. And I think Pilate's response was pretty much, I wrote what I wrote.
Yeah. That's pretty much what he said.
Why did you write that? I wrote what I wrote.
Yeah.
And
with carrying the cross, too, back to that, is solid wood piece, and it's the estimation for like the size of it was 10 to 13 feet tall, and then the parts that go out,
the wingspan,
the wingspan or whatever, it was about 6.5 feet wide.
So this thing was huge.
Yeah, solid piece of wood, and probably weighed over 100 pounds at least.
I think you said it was.
When we were discussing this before,
165.
Yeah,
pounds.
Yeah,
on
probably.
Average.
My guess is I would assume that's about how much it would weigh. And then, so one of the other facts that we read in John, the verses are 19:33 through 34, is when they pierced Jesus' side with a spear to see if he was dead. Because I believe they saw, they noticed that he was, they were like, oh, he looks dead. So they didn't, normally they would break their legs. They would break their legs to finish them off, pretty much. Like, be like, all right, you're still not dead. And because of it being the Sabbath, they didn't want them being on the cross. Or they didn't want them being on the cross during the Sabbath. So that's why they broke the 2 others' legs, I believe. And then Jesus's legs were not broken, which is a fulfillment of prophecy saying that none of his bones will be broken.
Yes, and I'll read some more about that in a minute, but...
And so instead they pierced his side to see if he was dead, and blood and water came out, which is people studied this, and it's the scientific
or the
medical term is precardial effusion, which is fluid around the lungs and the heart. Or there's a different name for the one around the heart, but around the lungs is precardial effusion, and which is a sign not of death but of I believe asphyxiation. So that's how, when they're on the cross, they had to breathe, to get a good breath in. They had to pull themselves up. Mind you, they're pulling themselves up with nails in their wrists.
And their feet.
Yeah, and pushing themselves up with their feet, which had nails in them. And then they had to lower themselves back down. So they're putting a lot of pressure on these parts that were, mind you, in pain already, and using that to hoist themselves up a little bit to get a breath in.
After major blood loss and everything from the flogging too.
Yeah.
It's just rough.
Yeah, and
you
I
know?
can't imagine, like, as you're pulling yourself up, your back, which was just flogged, is rubbing up against wood.
Yeah.
So, and has a crown of thorns on his head. Like,
And nails in his wrists and his feet.
in his feet. And yeah, you're just the worst suffering anybody could go through.
Truly, I think historically recorded, this is the worst punishment
ever
recorded, and there will never be anything worse than this. And
I doubt being burnt at the stake even comes close to this.
Oh, man.
Yeah, like, it's just
And
unbelievable.
the thing that I think is crazy when you read about those events that happened when he died, how there was a darkness over the land. It's almost like, when you read in Exodus, I think it was the 9th plague was darkness.
Yeah.
God calls this kind of supernatural darkness to come over the land. Some people have theorized that it was a solar eclipse that happened at the time of his death.
Yeah.
But some people also theorize that it was probably a supernatural darkness on the land, kind of like, what happened during the 9th plague. I don't want to say anything for certain, but
Yeah.
we don't really know for sure. It's just really interesting, and the ground, the earth shook.
Yeah.
And the veil was torn
in the temple at the time.
Yeah.
And like the people, and it even said, I think a lot of people pass over this, right? In Matthew, we just rode. We just rode. Yeah, what? We take a journey. We rode through it.
Okay.
Can't remember what chapter is that?
I save.
Yeah, I know.
27.
27. That's right. Okay. We can get to this.
It's truly a bizarre event, Here
we go. It says this. I don't know why people they kind of skip over this, but the tombs were also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep, another way of just saying they're dead, were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many.
Crazy.
Yeah. So people were raised from the dead when he died.
And it says he gave up his spirit.
Yeah. And on this was in one of the other books. He cried out to God, and
yeah, and so that's like this was not just a man, not just a prophet, not just some
special, just a regular human being that was like special kind of.
This goes to show he was more than man.
Mm-hmm.
And what's also happening here is God is essentially pouring out all his wrath onto Jesus. Why? Because he loves us so much. And when Jesus died on this cross, he was pretty much, the old covenant, how, there's food laws and other certain things that were essentially just super difficult to follow. Pretty much just he's fulfilling all of them by doing this. And, and also what's happening here is, this is, I believe Jesus said it while he was up on the cross, it is finished. Meaning that, God's wrath is no more. That's why, we don't see God's wrath today as we see it in the Old Testament,
Mhm.
A lot of people ask those kind of things like, where is the wrath of God today? Why don't we see, you know,
Yeah. Well, that's what
him?
hell is the wrath
Yeah,
of God. That's why we, and with the like food stuff and like the things we see in the Old Testament, those laws,
those
we don't have
were
to we don't have to those were to separate themselves. I
those
think you
was to
might have mentioned that
separate
in
the
like
Israelites.
one of our other stuff. Yeah. Was to separate themselves to show that they were, with God. And, after Jesus dying, it then, made it so anybody can be with God. And we don't need those laws to separate, to show that we're separate. We show that by telling the good news to people that, and that we are saved,
Yeah, and
through
then
Jesus dying.
Jesus also says, you know, I believe this is after his resurrection, but I probably should say this for the next episode. But since we're on the subject, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, to love one another as I have loved you. By this, people will know that you are my disciples." That is how we're set apart, by showing people the love of God. It's
Mhm.
not in just what we say,
Yeah.
but it's also what we do, how we treat other people, how we go about our lives, and how we interact with other people, and how do we love people by sharing with them the good news, by sharing with them what God has done for us, you know? And it's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I believe there was something you were going to say before I said that. So,
I don't remember.
dang.
I think
All
it
right.
was what I was just said.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a plane over top. Hopefully, it doesn't catch in the
Yeah. And my
audio.
phone was
But
going off earlier.
um,
Sorry about that.
and a couple things here. We talked about how it said that he was fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm reading through Exodus, and so I read about how the Passover ceremony and things like that. And so a couple of things. The Passover is almost God prophesying these events. It's almost prophesying
Yeah.
Jesus' crucifixion. Because a couple little notes um, about the Passover. Well, in Exodus 12:46, when he's talking about the Passover and the lamb and all these other things, it says, "And you shall not break any of its bones, any of the lamb's bones." Um, and as we just read, when they took Jesus off the cross to make sure that he was actually dead, and to basically finish him off, they didn't break his bones. They pierced his side, and water and blood came out.
Yeah.
The precardial
Yeah.
effusion. Um, so, a couple other things too. The lamb had to be spotless and clean. Jesus was perfectly sinless. Um, Blood was placed on the doorposts in the lintel or the supporting beam that's at the top
Mm-hmm.
of the door. They would place blood on those two sides and the top. And that is also the
Mm-hmm.
location of where Jesus' wrists would have been when they were nailed,
Mm-hmm.
and where the crown of thorns was placed.
Yeah.
So, which were three places where I can almost guarantee he was bleeding from.
Yeah.
So, that's a couple of things. And the crucifixion was within a day or a couple of days of the Passover or the Last Supper,
Yeah.
which is also pretty interesting. How ironic is it that they're having this feast, which pretty much prophesies what's going to take place in just a couple of days right before it all happens.
Yeah.
And the Passover was about 1700 years
Mm-hmm.
when God was telling Moses these things, to the Passover feast and the tradition of it. This is like 1700 years before Jesus came.
Yeah.
You know, That's a long time.
Hmm.
So we know that God was already planning for this at the time of
Yeah.
Moses. So it's wild. There's so many people that don't want to believe that Jesus is God. How is it that God is already talking about these events that are going to take place
Yeah.
this many years before they happen?
Hmm.
He was planning on this. This is all
Yeah.
part of God's plan this whole time. So it's crazy. Just all these things, and you know, for those who want to say, well, maybe Jesus didn't actually die. Like, listen,
Yeah.
the Romans had to be
Yeah.
killing was their
Sure.
job.
That water and blood was a sure,
Sign.
sign that he was dead, because, the signs of him dying from asphyxiation, of being on the cross,
Yeah,
and bleeding out. Like, I don't even know how some of the other guys survived past that,
I know.
but he, they had a sure, you know, uh, reason to confirm that he was dead. And, on top of this is, you know, people, might speculate, a lot, everyone's going to have their speculations, but remember, when these things were written, you know, within, like you said, the 30 years after all this took place, all the people that witnessed this were still alive. A lot of them were still alive. So,
Mary,
yeah,
Peter, I believe was
even
probably still alive,
out of
and
the 500 witnesses that he,
resurrection
and
episode. We're gonna talk
yeah,
more about that.
but even still, all the people that witnessed this happen, they could have been like, no, this didn't
No,
happen. They could have criticized the writers, but how is it that this, in the entire Bible has, yeah, I know, it's slamming, but the entire Bible has, been around for this long,
survives.
survived this
You know, years and years and years of
thousands of years.
thousands since these
Hmm.
writings took place. This this
How
literature,
how many people you think could have said, you know, denied that these events didn't take place?
and then you have Dead Sea Scrolls, which are like one of the earliest copies of the New Testament, and
Yeah.
a whole bunch of or the Gospels. Thousands of other manuscripts that are copies or other writings talking
Hmm.
about these events. Why? Because they actually happened. And
Yeah.
all these other religions and all these other people that try to deny these facts and try to say these things never happened, they did.
Yeah. There's
They
no other
did.
explanation.
I don't know how else to communicate the fact that these things did in fact happen. I don't know how else to further prove that they did.
Yeah. You just have to go and read it for
Go and read it for
yourself.
yourself.
Yeah.
And
That's literally all you have to do.
keep in mind you're reading 4 different perspectives. So not everything is going to be the exact same in all of them.
Hmm.
If
And
they
it's not,
say
I've heard one time it was like someone read it in chronological order.
no.
That's not, they're different accounts, they're different perspectives, like
Yes.
we've said. So, we gotta, when you read it, you gotta read it as like, all right, so this is like someone's perspective. And each gospel, sorry, each gospel accomplishes to a different uh thing too. Like, one is mainly just talks about his, his parables and his kind of like mainly his life, and then another, others accomplish different things, so they talk about Jesus's life in different ways, but the crucifixion and his death and resurrection and all that is accomplished in all four. It's
Yeah.
consistent. So whether it leaves out a small detail in one, and mentions in another, is those don't disprove anything. Like you said earlier too.
Mhm.
Those, you know, it's like when I'm reading the Case of Christ, they mention this. It's like one when every a whole bunch of people are interviewing, or taking notes on somebody saying something. Everybody's in a different spot, and when in the Case of Christ, Lee Strobel mentions he was at some I think it was some political person was talking, and as he left, he said something. He didn't hear it, but somebody else did. So he went to that person and asked them, what they said. So he received that information from another source that was there at the time. So that's kind of what's happening here with the Gospels is each person was there, but in a different location. They each have their own perspective from, the event that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens with all history, all other history.
Yeah.
Different events took place during World War II, and you have different stories about the same event that happened, and everybody has the same idea of what happened during World War II.
Yeah. And a little challenge, if anyone is up to it, go and, rent or buy 4 World War II books written from people who were actually there
Yeah.
and see if they all have the same exact story to tell. I guarantee what you'll find is that the war turnout was the same, that, D-Day happened, and that all these certain events did
Hmm.
take place, but there are different people in each book, that there are different locations named in each book, that there are
Hmm.
different things taking place, but the story remains the
Yeah.
same of how World War II happened. It's the
Yeah.
same, So you have to look at the Gospels kind of the same way. 4 different people writing about the same event,
Hmm.
but not all of it's going to look exactly the
Yeah.
same as it does in the others. There's going to be
Yeah.
some differences, but not contradictions. Not contradictions. Not, well, contradictions, just
Mm.
differences. But
Yeah.
it's not denying that either of those things
Hmm.
happened or that either of them didn't.
Yeah.
It's saying that they happened, but these are just people's different perspectives of what did happen.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this is probably our longest episode, so we
Yeah.
might as well cut it off here because we also have a
Yeah.
lot to say next week about
Yeah.
the resurrection.
And if you're interested, you can go check out our website,
Yes.
theqtrnote.com, and we have uh, the Good News merchandise collection for this 4-part series. And on the back, well, if we ordered our own
We have
for
not got them yet
we yeah we,
because
you
at the time of recording, we just like
so if
finished the
we get them
designs.
before the next episode, we'll show them off, but if not, then we'll just have a video over top of this showing it. Um, and on the back, it has a really cool design with represent with 4 icons representing birth, life, death, and resurrection. And it's a cool way to get people to ask questions, because that's the whole purpose we created this shirt. We don't care about the money.
No.
That's not why we're doing this. It's to I don't care if you order our shirt specifically. Even you can order another company's if you want, but we if you like our design, you can order ours, obviously. But you know the whole reason is to spread the message of Jesus dying for our sins. So that's why we do this.
Yeah.
Just got to reiterate that. I feel like you know the industry and everywhere is getting flooded with snakes.
Yeah.
If you want to, so devil lurks in the shadows. So and in plain sight, even. So you gotta be careful. So we want to make sure that we're
Spreading the truth.
spreading the truth, and we're doing it not for ourselves.
Yeah. It's all for the glory of God.
Yes.
All for God's kingdom. And, so if you guys do want to support our ministry, this is one of the few ways that you can.
Yeah.
And we don't ask for much. We don't ask for your money. We don't ask for any of that. But it is a good way to get more people to our ministry and to see what we have to say and to hear about Jesus and to help plant seeds, because Jesus is coming back soon. And, so we need to start being bold and spreading the good news and spreading the gospel, because that's what we're called to do. And this merch collection helps to, like you
just
said,
keep
get
the
people,
ministry going.
keep the ministry going, and to get people asking questions. We're just super excited for what God has planned for this, and just what the future of the Corner Note holds. So I hope that you guys stick with us and keep going along for the ride. And I want to try something new. There's like a Q&A thing in the bottom on Spotify. I don't know if Apple Music has it, but if you're watching,
we can
on
also do a poll on YouTube.
Let us know, A, if you liked this series and so far, and B, if you want us to do more series, and C, what do you want us to do next? Because we want to take your suggestions. If there's something that you want us to talk about, we'll do the research, we'll talk about it, and we'll try to do it in the most biblically sound way, because we don't want to skew or twist any of God's word. This is God's word, and we want to preach it to its wholeness and to its entirety, into a way that's easy to understand, into a way that conveys it.
Don't want to sugarcoat anything.
Don't want to sugarcoat anything, and want to just make sure that we're spreading the truth and not lies.
Yeah.
That is our mission. We want to spread the truth, not lies, and do it word for word, what this Bible says and what we believe as Christians and followers of Christ. So, thank you guys for watching. Sorry that this episode was long, but I feel like there's a lot of really good information. So
share it with your friends.
Share it
with your family.
Share it with your family, whoever, because like we said, got to start spreading that message. So we love you guys. Jesus definitely loves you guys.
No matter who you are, where you are, what you've done.
Thank you guys for watching.
See ya. Thank you for tuning into the Corner Note podcast. Make sure you rate and follow, and tune in next week for the next episode.